Nowadays, it can feel like everything in the government is up for sale. Everything from a senator to the national parks could be bought if you have enough money. But is the US Army actually selling rank to tech bros? Or is this a little bit more complicated than the news makes it seem? I'm Paul, US Army combat veteran, and we're going to talk about how the tech bros becoming lieutenant colonels is actually more complicated and, frankly, quite a bit stupider than you realize. Let's get into it. Ever wonder why so many militaries have a cyber warfare branch? In fact, a lot of militaries have more hackers than they do jet pilots and snipers. The reason is obvious. Information on the internet is a gold mine. And that's true whether you're stealing an invasion plan or stealing an identity. Even a basic internet search reveals tons of information about you and your family: names, addresses, phone numbers, emails, even property records. That all happens because of data brokers, companies that collect your data and sell it to the highest bidder. That can be robocallers, telemarketers, spammers, and even scammers. That's why I'm glad to partner with today's sponsor, Aura. Aura scans the web to identify which data brokers have your data for sale. And Aura automatically submits opt-out requests on your behalf. They'll even reduce junk mail and telemarketing calls so you don't have to deal with them. You can check out how many data brokers have your information using my link, aura.com/combat. Try it for free for 2 weeks and see just how much of your data is exposed out on the internet. The link is in the description, or you can scan the QR code on the screen. And Aura does more than just remove your information from data broker lists. It monitors your emails and passwords to see if they've been exposed in any hacks. And it alerts you if your information is found circulating the dark web. For example, Aura found some of my personal data had been exposed in the recent Meta and Google hacks, which means that if I wasn't careful, someone could have used that info against me. Beyond that, Aura is an all-in-one security solution. It's got a VPN, a password manager, real-time credit and identity theft monitoring, internet parental controls, even malware for your devices. It's a full internet suite in one easy-to-use app. Let Aura keep you and your personal data safe. Sign up today using my link and you'll get a free 2-week trial to see just how much of your information is exposed. Trust me, you'll be surprised. Go to aura.com/combat to start your free trial, or you can click the link below or scan the QR code. Okay, so this is the story. If you have been living under a rock, Palantir, Meta, OpenAI, and the company called Thinking Machines have all had high-level technical or tech executives in these organizations commissioned directly to the rank of lieutenant colonel. Now, for those of you that don't know, a lieutenant colonel is usually the terminal rank for a military officer's career. And so the way it generally works is, again, for those of you that don't know the U.S. military, is that you attend a commissioning source. Almost always you have completed a bachelor's degree, and then the U.S. military commissions you, and you can enter active duty as a lieutenant, or you can enter the reserve component, the National Guard. But you spend your time in those services, and every so often at set periods, you get reviewed for promotability. And if the military decides that you meet the cut, they'll promote you to the next rank. And that happens at the usually around 4-year mark. You go from lieutenant to captain. You also get bumped from first to second lieutenant at 18 months. But the big rank jump is at 4 years when you get bumped to captain from first lieutenant. And then when you are around 8 years of service or so, you get another bump to major, right? And then from there, around, I'd say the 15th year of service, depending on your branch, you will get looked at to see if you're eligible to promote to lieutenant colonel. And usually a typical Army career will end at lieutenant colonel, since most officers retire at 20 years old. And of course, those that stay in longer are eligible to promote to higher ranks like colonel, 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star general, etc. But the Army, so it seems pretty, corrupt on its surface to say, listen, you've spent your entire career at a company like Meta doing tech stuff, and then you get to skip basic training and literally 2 decades of military service and drop right into lieutenant colonel, because ostensibly they're going to help, quote, modernize the military, part of a broader push by the Army to bring private sector innovation and reshape how the service approaches technology. They're going to serve in a unique unit called Detachment 201, and this includes, of course, the Chief Technology Officer of Meta, the Chief Technology Officer of OpenAI, Chief of Product at OpenAI, and an advisor at Thinking Machines Lab, a guy named Bob McGrew, all of which are going to serve in a Unit 201, also known as the Army's Executive Innovation Corps. Now, the Army says, quote, Detachment 201 is being created to bring tech innovation executives to help the Army on broader conceptual things like talent management. How do we bring in tech-focused people into the ranks of the military? And then how do we train them? Now, these recruits are going to get to bypass boot camp. Instead, they're going to go through an express training program that covers marksmanship, physical fitness, Army history, and protocols. And they'll be expected to serve about 120 hours. That's about 3 working weeks per year, and pass the annual Army physical fitness test, right? They also say this is a pilot, a lighter version of basic training. Now, here's my hot take. 1, the Army is thinking the right way about this. Why? Because you notice that system I described to you of promotions that happen on fixed timelines. Well, what that means is that what never happens in the Army is any external agency comes in, right? No one ever gets brought into the Army from external places. But you have to think for a minute. That doesn't happen at any of the best companies in the world. And so remember, if you went back in time to the year 2001, right? The U.S. Army was just beginning its combat in Iraq and Afghanistan, while Google was just starting to get run up as a new search engine. And in those 25 years, the U.S. Army lost 2 wars. And again, I say this as someone who fought in one of them, while Google became the most valuable human private enterprise ever to exist. And so I draw that contrast because you would think that people at Google, like the Army would have some mechanism for mid-career people at Google to come over to the Army, or for people to leave the Army and go back. If you look at the careers of Google executives, there are probably fewer that have, almost every one of them probably has gone to another company or come from another company. And what they do is they bring in from those companies the best practices. And when they leave Google, they go to other companies and implement some of those best practices. And so what you get is an evolution, a cross-pollination of ideas about how organizations can run and be effective. The problem is the U.S. Army, you can only enter at the bottom. And once you leave for good. And so what you end up with is an organization that is so resistant to change, it effectively is the idea version of being constantly inbred. The same people, remember, receiving the same training, the same experiences, with the same gear, they're going to think the same way, right? Imagine how much innovation, for example, Amazon got, right? Remember, Amazon used to deliver a whole lot of books. And then one day they said, we could build this thing called Amazon Web Services. Well, what they almost certainly did is went to other companies that built cloud infrastructure and found their talent and said, come to Amazon and help us build the same thing, right? The U.S. Army had, in 20 years, never did that. Never did they go to any other place in the U.S. economy or anywhere else in the United States and say, you guys are doing something better than us. Why don't you teach us how it's done, right? And so the fact that they're at least trying this is awesome. And a lot of people are saying, oh, well, this light version of basic training, they're skipping the most important part. They're not getting instilled with Army culture and values. But here's the problem. The U.S. Army has already been doing this for decades, right? In fact, going back to World War II, there was a direct commission process in which individuals with sufficient specialty expertise in specialty roles would get directly commissioned to a career-appropriate rank so that they could serve. And in World War II, this happened about 16,000 times. And 3/4 of that number were either clergy. So, for example, you would find a chaplain, a Catholic priest, right? They say, listen, there's a lot of Catholic soldiers. We need more priests. You're a mid-career priest. Why don't we bring you in at whatever rank you need to be to make sure you don't lose your livelihood, and you can administer to the troops who are forward deployed and get the protections afforded to a soldier, right? And critically, medical personnel, right? Again, imagine you're a highly skilled surgeon, right? You're not going to enter as a lieutenant making the equivalent of $43,000 a year, right? So these branches were authorized to promote chaplains, mental, medical, veterinary, and at the time what was seen as a sanitary corps, think of them as public health physicians, could literally directly commission them up to colonel. You also saw this in World War II for the judge advocate generals, right? For example, let's say you needed to have more judges to hold trials for this much larger World War II military. Well, you could hire an experienced county judge and say, we'll bring you on as a colonel or as a major to make sure that you have rank commensurate with the role you're going to be doing. You also saw this in the military intelligence field, which is probably the closest analogy to what we have here, right? Individuals who are highly skilled at highly technical work. For example, someone skilled at taking and interpreting high-resolution photographs from aerial reconnaissance or operations research was most famous. Those highly skilled individuals might get poached from academia and given direct commission so that they could serve. So this is something that has existed in tradition, and it continues to exist today. In fact, when I was in the Army Reserve, one of the soldiers that served with me was a trauma surgeon, an ER surgeon who saw acute trauma patients in a major urban area, actually in Dallas, Texas. And the reason that he was actually put on orders very frequently by people like the U.S. Navy SEALs, not because he could kick down doors or threw grenades better than anyone else. It's because he, as a trauma surgeon in a major urban area, saw stabbings, shootings, explosions, car accidents, multiple times a day, every single day. If you are a Navy SEAL or Delta Force operator, that is the man who you want looking at you when you take a gunshot wound from an insurgent. So in order to make sure, right? So how did he come in to the Army Reserve? Well, the answer is literally the experience that mattered for him was what he did every single day in that ER. And so to bring him on board, right, as a physician, he had to attend a basic basic officer leadership course, which for a reservist is literally just 2 weeks long in Fort Sam Houston, Texas. There's also a digital component. So literally you will listen to some online lectures and take some online tests and maybe submit some like written work about Army rank structure, Army culture, wear and appearance of the uniform. But the fact is that you spend 2 weeks getting a sort of orientation course to Army stuff. And then you are out treating patients, treating soldiers who need those skills so badly. So it sounds like you're saying, Paul, having these tech bros in the Army sounds like a great idea. This is a chance to bring innovation. And the idea of bringing in tech bros to the Army at middle and upper career ranks to infuse a fresh pivot to the culture is a good idea. But there's a small problem that's actually a pretty big problem. And that is the conflict of interest. And that's probably one of the, I'm going to say, the toughest issues that they are facing, right? And so here's the number one problem. The U.S. Army Reserve has what's actually, it's been identified as a problem because, again, when I was in the reserves, I was in the DC area. So a ton of officers in my unit had roles elsewhere in the federal government and oftentimes elsewhere in the Pentagon. And what that meant was that they had to be extremely careful, and not even they, but their commanders had to be extremely careful about what's called conflict of interest. Because imagine if you work for, let's say, a consulting company, and that consulting company is bidding for a contract with the U.S. Army Reserve to say, provide them with a bunch of new computers, right? Well, let's say you work for that company on the civilian side, and then one weekend a month, 2 weeks a year, you are on the other side of that contract, right? You could be reviewing that contract for your own employer. And obviously, when you're talking about a mid-level officer who's been in the Army Reserve for 10 or 15 years, the odds, and you're talking about a massive 2 million person organization, the chances are actually not that great that you're going to have that overlap. And it's pretty easy for someone to say, hey, don't you work for McKinsey? Okay, well, this contract actually has McKinsey bidding on it. So you have to make sure you have to sit this one out, and let me email one of 15 other reserve officers who can be contracting officers who can step in and review this contract in an objective way. Because remember, even if that officer says, no, I can put work aside, I can put my biases aside and review this contract fairly. The problem is whoever loses that contract, they could sue. And at the very least, they could tie up the implementation of that contract for years while they say, listen, the U.S. Army, they were biased. See, they literally had a McKinsey employee reviewing the contract. And now you have to prove in court that you weren't biased. So the Army says, even the perception of unfairness, we have to get it out of contracts. And when you're talking, again, about a 1 million person organization with a bazillion contracting officers, it's not that hard. The issue comes in is in the specific mission of Detachment 201, because 201's job is to implement new systems into the military and to leverage their expertise in these major roles, right? Who are almost certainly going to be bidding for AI contracts. The problem is, what can they do? What could this Meta executive, or this OpenAI executive, or Palantir executive, what could they do if they're told, listen, we want you to bring your expertise in high-tech systems, figure out how we're going to implement new high-tech systems into the Army. Oh, by the way, though, you can't have any involvement in actually the contracting part. So the part where you bring those systems into the Army, right? Because they can sit there and say, you guys should have more AI, but that's not a contract. A contract's going to say, we want an AI system that handles personnel management and assignments and staffing, right? Well, how do you write that? They want these executives to know what the technology is capable of. What can AI do for us? But that is the same thing as saying, what can your company do for us? Tell us, and we will write the contract. Do you see how the expertise they want is the same thing as a conflict of interest? And the hard part is that this is so niche. This is a tiny field with a tiny number of competitors. That is the problem, is that you can't sit there and say, well, basically, think about it. If the Army was to have a large language model contract out for bidding, we all know who would bid on it, right? Are you going to implement a language model that is sufficient, right? No, of course not. Like, you're going to need a Meta-sized company that can do the data security, that can host the model, right? That can handle all of the infrastructure needs. So who's going to bid on it? Well, it's going to be any AI contract that the government wants to roll out is basically going to be OpenAI. It's going to be Palantir. It's going to be Meta. It's going to be Google. And that's it. Those are like the 4 or 5. Maybe there'll be one other 5th AI company. Well, that's the only places. They're senior executives. There's only a few senior executives that can do this. So the pool is just too small to do this fairly. And so what you're going to have, I think, is unhelpful stuff. That's one of the reasons why contractors are so favored by the Army. And the reason they love this is because you can sit there and go, listen, McKinsey, listen, OpenAI, we want you to give us a big old report about what the Army can do or what we can do to implement AI. And then we will have our colonels who are active duty, who only work for us, review it. And it's not perfect because, as you know, I'm sure if you had OpenAI do it, they would sit there and go, well, we can, AI can do a ton of things. And here's all the things it can do. Oh, by the way, this list of things that we think it should do for you, they happen to be the exact capabilities of OpenAI, FYI, right? That happens all the time, and that's part of the corruption. But do you see how the system is so interwoven that it's really hard to extract corruption from the bidding process, from the contracting process. And this isn't helping that. This is making things worse. And so again, the controversy here isn't about rank buying. That is the least problematic part of this, right? The problematic part is the foxes are being brought into the henhouse and put in charge of egg distribution. And so, again, I hate being somebody who has complaints but doesn't have solutions. I think the solution is to go back in time 20 years and have a really good pipeline for people to sit there and go, hey, I am 32 years old. Maybe I served in the Army in my youth, and now I'm a mid-career executive at Amazon. And I know things about running a logistics system that would blow the Army's mind. And the Army might say, listen, why don't you come back on board for 3 years? Why don't you move over, right? Leave your job at Amazon. We will bump you up to major or bump you up to lieutenant colonel, right? Keep your pay commensurate and say, listen, spend 3 years helping the US Army build our version of Amazon's super effective logistics system. And then after 3 years, the Army goes, thanks so much. You were a great employee. We'd love to have you back. But you go, you know what? I'm going to go to another company. I'm going to go to a startup for a couple of years. And then you go, okay, well, I've been at this startup and maybe I'll go back to the military, the Pentagon, to end my career. Or maybe I will go back to Amazon, right? That's what a normal career looks like. But somehow the Army was like, well, we want to just we want to blockade ourselves off from getting any of those fresh ideas, that new talent. So I think they should have created this system way earlier. And that way you're going to have more expertise already in the Army at any one time you're going to have more people able to talk the talk instead of what you have now, which is a bunch of generals who have literally spent 35 years doing one thing, which is learning how to make tank roll good, right? And suddenly they're turning around and they're saying, we need to figure out how to make an AI-powered drone swarm. And they're like, most of these generals, they stopped learning new things when it was like how to field a battalion of tanks, how to field a brigade of tanks, right? Especially in the global war on terror. Look at the famous General McChrystal. His vision was so small that he would go out on individual raids with Special Operations Command. And don't get me wrong, that's cool. I'm sure for someone, it felt awesome to get on the ground, nitty-gritty with the troops. But is that what you want your visionary general to do? Is that what you want the man who's going to steer the entire war towards victory? Is that a productive use of their time? Again, that's like a CEO every single day sweeping the floor of his offices. Like at some point, dude, you have a company to run. Anyway, that's all I have. Thank you guys so much. Hit that subscribe button as always. Thanks to James J21, Yanko Georgiev, Chris Gorsuch, Paul Templeton, Cytronic, Steve Moran, TR Need, Alan Liston, and CM Holmes, all of our Lieutenant tier members, and of course, today's sponsor, Aura. Couldn't do it without you guys. See you in the next one. Cheers.